I'm Ann Jordan, and I wanted to add my perspective to a story that David Deans has shared recently about disciple making, and especially what it looks like to be intentional. So a few days ago, I went into the church office at Oakdale where I work and learned that the dean's dog had been missing since the night before. And the staff was asked to keep an eye out for little Bryn around the parsonage or on the church campus in case she was still right there in the area. But about 11 o'clock in the morning, I had to head down to Virginia for a conference. And as I am turning from the church southbound onto Georgia Avenue, I see David across the street putting up flyers about the missing dog. And David looked a little bit like a sad puppy himself. And I felt like maybe I ought to stop and pray with him. I know what it's like when one of our pets has gone missing and the worry that goes with that. But I also thought I had built in a little bit of extra time, but not a whole lot in case there was traffic on the Beltway or I-66. And if I stopped to pray, I'd probably be late for the conference. And yet I remembered, too, that David and Deb had been such prayer warriors for me in the last year as I had been going through treatment for cancer. And so I did a U-turn right there by the swim center and headed back north and looked for David where he'd been just a few minutes before, and he wasn't there anymore. And I thought, where could he have gone? And thinking he's probably in the shopping center putting up more flyers. And so I drove really slowly through the parking lot there, and I still didn't see him, and time was passing. And I had to make a decision about, do I just get back on Georgia and head to Virginia, or do I maybe see if David is back at his house out in the yard calling for the dog. And so I went across Georgia onto Emory Church Road, and David is suddenly walking past me, heading back out toward Georgia, and he crosses over and is in the median putting up another flyer. And I parked my car by the chapel and jumped out and looked both ways and crossed Georgia Avenue as well. And I went up to him and just said, David, I want to pray for you. And I put my hand on his shoulder and closed my eyes and prayed. And I don't know what the drivers in the cars whizzing up and down Georgia Avenue thought was happening there. And it doesn't matter what they thought was happening. I was responding to the prompting that God had put in my heart, that as you go, make disciples. And I was going down to Virginia, not heading back toward Olney, but I made the intentional decision to risk being late for a disciple-making conference in order to go and really practice disciple-making. And as I then proceeded to get back in my car and drive to Virginia, God just paved the way. There was no traffic to speak of at all around noon, and I got off of I-66 onto Route 28, and I saw my phone was ringing, and I saw it was David, and I knew if I picked it up, I was going to lose my GPS navigation to the church where the conference was going to be, but I also knew David must be calling about the dog, so I answered the call, and he starts to tell me that 10 minutes after we prayed, they'd gotten a phone call that the dog had been found the night before and was safe, and he was so excited and wanted to share. And so I did the right thing. I pulled over into a parking lot of an industrial park and just let him share that part of the story. And then I after I hung up, put Google Maps back on, and yes, indeed, I had driven past the street where I should have turned, but I got to the church, in fact, with about 10 extra minutes to spare. I don't know how God made that happen, but I had time even to grab a sandwich before going into the hall to hear these people talk about disciple making. And I realized that I had almost let the opportunity to practice disciple making be trumped by my desire to go and to learn more about it from the experts. And I am so glad that I made the choice that I did that day, because I know that not only was David blessed by it, but I was as well. Thanks for letting me share.